Hello and welcome back to On the Soul's Terms podcast. Thanks for joining me today, and then welcome to the new year, to 2026. I hope wherever you are out there, you are taking good care of yourself in this time out of time part of the year. It was always known as that in the ancient world. In fact, calendars would stop around the solstice and then take some time, actually quite literally out of time. There's stories of just waiting in the darkness until the bell rings and the new year begins, whenever that might be, which could be some months from now. Sometimes the calendar wouldn't open for another 60 days or so, waiting for another couple of lunar cycles to pass before the year truly begins. And it's a common refrain that I've heard around this time that no one's quite sure what day it is, and no one's quite sure where we are when it comes to those days of the week. So all that is to say that this podcast was hoping to come out a little earlier than this, but it is instead coming out exactly when it means to come out, which is on a Saturday, at least my time, on Saturn's day. And Saturn will be certainly with us on this day as we enter, or we make that transition from that ninth house, the house of our high vision and ideals and that greater mind and that mind of God that we're reaching towards, that we're flying up into the sky by Zephyr or by Pegasus or by the eagle, and getting that eagle eye view of the ninth. And we're making that perhaps quite difficult transition from that vision of the ninth into the earthly realm of the 10th. We're moving from the fire of vision into the actualization of the 10th. And in order to do that, we have to cross over another threshold, perhaps the greatest threshold yet, and that is the MC, or the Midheaven. That's right, the middle of the heavens, the place that is most visible, the medium coeli, which is the middle of the sky. And so it's at this point in our journey that we really do feel that reach up and out of our early conditioning, our childhood, our wounds, our early experiences, all these voices that tell us what we can and we cannot do. And we attempt to reach up and beyond that and meet the world. And this concept of the world is something that we will need to spend some time really resting into and getting a deeper sense of. And in order to do that, we're going to, of course, as is the style of this podcast, we're going to look back to some images, and we're going to get into some stories and myths and symbols in order to feel like, what is it that we mean by the world? And we're also going to go back to a passage from Dane Rudhyar. There's a book that was mentioned by Melanie Reinhardt in my fourth house episode, a book that I got very curious about, but only now have actually delved into. And the book is called New Mansions for New Men by Dane Rudhyar. Now, Melanie brings that up in terms of the fourth house, and the phrase for the fourth house being I establish. And then the opposite house of the 10th house. So the fourth house, if you remember, is our root system, our early experiences, our ancestry. And down there in our ancestry is where we establish who we are, deep in the other side of the sky, in the midnight sun, not in this noonday sun, but in the midnight sun. We establish deep inside of in our interiority. We get a feel and a sense of who we are, but it's dark down there. And so, as Melanie said, there's a lot of I don't see down there. There's a lot of watery understanding down there. And as we move through that watery channel, we come up into the 10th house, or the MC, and we move into the idea of I achieve. This is what Dane Rudhyar talks about of the 10th house, I achieve. And so we're down into the root system, and then we're coming back up into this I achieve. which he talks about in this brilliant passage. I'm going to read some of that for you today. He talks about that as the root of achieve, as becoming the chief. So in the 10th house, we become the chief, which is to say that we harness and integrate the power that we have, and we take that establishment of our inner world and we bring it to the world. We bring that to the world, and we step into who we are truly meant to be. And there's a lot of concepts inside of that Rudyard actually gets into in this passage that I'll read to you, and then we can make an attempt to tease that out a little bit and to get a sense of like, well, so what is this 10th house then? What is it really to us as individuals as we make our way along this sacred thing called life, our lives? And we all have an MC, we all have a midheaven, we all have something to contend with when it comes to our relationship between us and the world. Just as in the 7th house, we have a relationship with us and the other. And just as in the 1st house, we have a relationship with us and ourselves. And in the 4th house, we have a relationship with us and our ancestry. Well, this house here is our relationship between us and the world. So we will be getting into some of that information, some of that juicy symbolic, those juicy symbolic words from Dane Rudhyar. I want to actually firstly talk about the name of the book, New Mansions for New Men. And of course, that can be a challenge, but in the mid-20th century, it was common to refer to man or he as that individual, which of course feels to us as moderners as very one-sided. But I think if we can give some leeway to that today, we can feel into what it really means as a statement of the individual, man or woman, referred to as man or he, as a word that we really don't have a substitute for. A very valuable way for our mind to work, because we're working with then that great individual that contains all the whole that we call man or he in this context. So then we're like, well, let's even that out, and we should have a she and woman as well. But the problem is that then when we do that, we no longer have that concept that gets split off into these two. So it's a difficulty. It's something that we haven't really worked out how to say that in the modern world, but it's a very valuable concept to have, rather than all of humanity, or rather than saying something like he, she, man, woman, which gets us a little bit kind of destabilized in what we're actually trying to say. There was something very clean about being able to say he and man, even though that was obviously problematic in the sense that it only seemed to refer to half of humanity, only the male side. It's a difficulty. It's one that we're going to have to spend some time with collectively, of what we want to work with there, what we want to say yes to and no to when it comes to that. But maybe it's something we can give some mind to. What would we like to replace it with if it feels that that leads us into a way of thinking that is male dominant, rather than a way of thinking that can encompass the whole? So as I said there, there's a sense of the I see, the I don't see, the I can't see, down the bottom of the chart, being this place that we establish. And when we move up, and I even referred to that as the sacrum when I was in conversation with Melanie, the sacrum down there, the sacred bone, the triangle bone that connects us back to our tails. And our tails are that invisible tail that was perhaps once a physical tail when we were ocean dwellers, but that invisible tail that connects us back to our ancestry and to our deep roots. That's where we establish. That's where our seed is planted, or the acorn takes root in the soil and begins to grow down first, before eventually, slowly and perilously sometimes, grows up and out. And then as that seed plants deeply, the tree begins to grow. In the case of the acorn, the oak begins to grow up through the spine and up into the MC, which is the visible part, the part that we can see. So we've got the I can't see down the bottom. The part that we can see is up here in the MC, which is a house of visibility. This is a house where we become visible, we become seen in the world, and we make our way up and out from this root system. And in fact, on the podcast, I've talked a lot about the oracle at Delphi, the oracle at the top of the mountain, the Pythia, who would operate off snake fumes and from an altered state deliver messages to those who are seekers. But an even earlier version, or a more ancient version, I'm not sure if earlier is right in this sense, but a more ancient and deeper version of that was a place called Dodona. And in Dodona, the oracle there was in fact an oak tree. And the oak tree was said to be essentially an embodiment of Dione. And Dione was a more ancient form of Zeus consciousness or God consciousness, but the female equivalent, in a sense, of that God consciousness called Dione. And Dione essentially is the feminine form of the word Zeus. And this ancient oak tree, people would gather around and ask questions of and wait to see how the oak would respond. And whether that was birds coming in and out, or rustling of the leaves, or some kind of movement, or maybe some invisible statement that the oak made, would then be a sense of being able to understand what the next moves were, or what was coming, or what the answer to the riddle was, or what you were coming up against in your challenge, in your 10th house challenge, in a sense of like how you were being confronted and how you were confronting the world, how you were coming into contact with your shape and the shape that you were growing into over the course of your lifetime. And somehow this oak would answer that question. And I like this form of oracle. I like this form of oracle because it gives us the chance to actually have reflected back to us our own oak consciousness. It has a chance to reflect to us our root system that takes us down the unseen part of the oak, and even the acorn part of the oak that has all of that information embedded in it, but also the visibility, the new acorns, the new seeds, the flowering of this tree, and investing in how beautiful it all can be ultimately. How beautiful that oak can be, how beautiful our own oak can be if we take on the challenges of our lives, if we don't shrink away, if we're able to meet what life is throwing at us. It's an important image, really, because we can also see so many branches of that tree. No tree is just one branch. And I think when it comes to the MC and the 10th house, which is the house of calling and vocation, sometimes our modern mind can get stuck on the idea that there's just one path for us. There's just one thing that I should be doing. But actually, if we think more imaginatively and more archetypally, we can see that as the many branches that are still of the same tree. The many, many ways in which our soul and our acorn wants and wanted to come out and flower and move and entangle and move like the snake that is the branch that goes out in multiple different directions. And so I think that can be really, in the modern world, one place where a lot of people find that there's a certain stuckness or stagnation, or maybe fear or petrification in the world, in that the concept is that a calling means that I just have my one thing to do in the world. And instead of that, if we start to think of how this seed might want to grow along several different pathways that are of the same seed that may help us to understand what it is exactly that this thing called a vocation or calling actually is. The word vocation is to call out or to vocalize, right? The vocation is vocalized, and it implies that something is calling to us. Michael Meade talks a lot about this as he says that the calling keeps calling. The calling keeps calling us forward and up and out, and the calling is up here at the MC. And that calling is calling for us, calling towards us, not just at every point in life, in a sense. Even from when we're very little, we tend to gravitate towards certain things that have a sense of who we're meant to be, those desires and following of those desires. And right up until the very end of our lives, we are always called, no matter what phase of life, we're always called into this shaping of who we are and who we're meant to be, and who, what our greater potentiality is and how we can actualize that. So this sense of calling, being up here in the 10th, in the MC, pulls us forward in a sense, like the idea of telos here. Telos is like a reversal of time in a sense, in that we're being not just, we don't just have a past, but we have a future that's also pulling us in a certain direction. But as I said, all those different branches, to make this beautiful tree, we have to be invested in several different branches. And my 10th house guest is going to be Thomas Moore. I'm so delighted to have had the opportunity to interview him already. I'll be bringing that to you next week, my interview with him, or the week after, we'll see. But Thomas himself is such a great illustration of this. He starts his life, when he's 13, he goes into a monastery, and he's studying essentially to be a priest for right up until his Saturn return. He's studying to be a priest, but then just as he's about to become a priest, studying Latin and ancient Greek and all of this ancient philosophy and what he gets into there, he sort of realizes that there's a different path for him, so he moves away from that. And a big part of his path was around music and musicality, but then as he came into his Chiron return in his early 50s, he begins to write, and he writes, of course, Care of the Soul. That incredible book. I'm sure a lot of you know it. And for a lot of people that I know, it's like their Bible. He writes that book at that time and starts off on a completely different journey, and then becomes also somewhere in there becomes a psychotherapist, and he's a teacher, and still in his mid-80s, he's teaching at universities, and he's wandering around trying to bring soul to hospitals, and trying to bring soul to universities, and trying to bring soul to everything that he touches. And you can hear it's not necessarily like, oh, he was here to do this. It's rather that he's here to unfold his soul into the world, unfold that seed of who he is into the world. So I thought at this point in the podcast, it could be a good thing to just come into our bodies to feel this, because this can also be so conceptual. I think the Midheaven can be so conceptual. Whereas I think, in a sense, the MC or the Midheaven is something like Kundalini energy. It's something like this rising energy that wants to take form. It wants to come forward. It wants to be this powerful force that meets the world. So if you have a moment, I'd like to just come into the idea of the I see, which is what Melanie told us is the words I establish. And we know that that's down the bottom of the spine down here. So let's just move into that. Whether you might be wandering around, you might be doing something, but maybe if you can just be still for a moment and just allow yourself to go right down into the bottom of your spine and feel that this is your I see. And as you move down into that, we'll bring in an image that is representative of the 10th house, because it's associated with Capricorn, is the seagoat. So the seagoat has this mer tail that goes down and down and down into the ocean, down and down and down into the bottom of the spine, down into that invisible tail, and let that go down and see where it might go. It may connect to the collective unconscious down there, to the ancestors, to all of these figures that have come and gone in our lineage, to the dead, to our family, to our roots. And just feeling that winding tail that goes down and connects to the deepest parts of the soul. And then as you follow that up now, you may come into that sacrum, the triangle bone at the bottom of the spine, and you just move up into the lumbar spine, which is the most solid part. It's the least moving, but the most solid part that really holds the trunk of your spine there. And as you're moving through that tail, that fish tail of the seagoat may get thicker, have more magnitude to it, have more density to it. And you're just coming up there, and you realize that the further you come up from that seagoat's tail, the more the spine itself feels like it's really materializing here. And as you move up, you may feel that metamorphosis begin to happen in the exchange between the ocean, the water-dwelling sea of the fourth house, and the eye sea, and that movement up to the land of the goat. So as we move through the middle of the spine, up into the thoracic spine, there's a little bit more movement available in the thoracic, but it's still very solid, and it's got those ribs and that protective rib cage that grows out of that. So you're moving up there. And then you're really starting to feel, as we move from the IC and we start to touch into the MC, this feeling of like more fluidity, which is a strange thing because we're coming from the water, but that fluidity remains with us. We are able to adapt and adjust where necessary as we move into the still very solid thoracic spine and up through those 12 vertebrae. And then we start to recognize that the goat here is really taking form, the goat part of us that is able to come up and butt heads and challenge and be challenged and climb mountains and see where it is that we want to go and have a sure-footedness in the world. And so you're coming up through that, and then maybe we move up into the cervical spine, and you can feel like there's still a solidness there, but it's very much more fluid. The cervical spine, those 7 vertebrae up the top, is able to, look around and move around and check out much more. It's got much more fluidity to it again, but it's still very powerful in that it can hold the whole head, the whole cranium can be held by this part of the spine. It's pretty remarkable actually what this part of the spine can actually do. It can say no by shaking its head, and it can say yes by nodding its head. It's that ability to say yes and no. And maybe that's the 2 horns of Capricorn. One horn is the ability to say yes to life, and one horn is the ability to say no. Or maybe one horn is what's there on your MC, and the other horn is what's there in your 10th house. There's always, or at least very often, some kind of a tension point of archetypes that we have to play out. This 2-hornness of the goat that we have to play out here in the 10th, where we have that tension of opposites that helps us shape who we are and who we're meant to be in this life. So let's move from that imagery now into a little bit of mythic stuff, because of course myth helps us to open our mind out even more, to get a sense of that collective dreaming process, which can perhaps just help us to settle into our own story of the MC, because after all, the MC being the most vertical point, the noonday point of the chart, is where we get to meet that higher self, where we get to meet that idea of who we are meant to be. But we've got to meet it in a very realistic way. We can't be flung into the fantasies at this point of the 9th house. We can't let that fully take over the fantasy of who we're meant to be. But we also can't let the fear of who we're meant to be stop us as well. So it's something between the Zeus and the Cronus here, the Jupiter and the Saturn, Jupiter being associated with the 9th house and Saturn being associated with the 10th. So something's propelling us forward, that's Jupiterian consciousness, and something's holding us back, that's Saturn consciousness. And if we can work, maybe that's also the two hands of this the two horns of the seagoat. And I slipped there to say two hands, but that maybe our hands are the horns, and how we actually get purchase on life with those hands is through one Jupiterian hand and one Saturnian hand. So the myth that I'm going to go back to then is the myth of ultimately the battle between Cronus and Zeus. Remembering again that Cronus is Saturn. That's just the Latinized form of Cronus. And Zeus is Jupiter. The Latinized version of Zeus is Jupiter. This is what we've named our planets after all. So there was a prophecy. There was a prophecy handed down to Cronus that one of his children would overthrow him. So we can already feel the 10th houseness of that, of the power and the authority and the rulership, and Cronus is the chief. Cronus has achieved. Cronus has the crown. And he doesn't want to give that up. Of course not. He wants to continue to rule over the world. And he's good at it. Let's face it, he ruled over the Golden Age. So we've got to give Cronus some credit here. He was a good chief when he ruled over the world. But he also has some tyrannicalness to him. He was also a tyrant. And in that way, his rulership would not be able to hold. And the way that he was tyrannical is that he didn't want any of his children to also grow strong and powerful. It was only he that could grow powerful. And of course, that comes back to the prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him. And that's why he needed to swallow them. And swallow them he did. Each one that was born, he took right into his belly, right from the womb into the belly. So as the child was being born, he would get under, because the goddess Rhea was in a squat position when these children of hers were born, and he would get his big mouth underneath and put his essentially his shoulders up against the calves and ankles of Rhea. It's quite a vivid image. And open his mouth wide, and as the child was born, he would take in the child completely, which I imagine he was also taking the placenta and all. Everything would go into his belly. And he did this 5 times. The first 5 Olympians were born this way, born out of Rhea, their mother, and into Cronus, into his belly, to continue on their gestation process. And of course, Rhea was appalled and terrified and disgusted by what was happening here. So she came up with a plan. And that plan was the next born child, she would wrap a stone in swaddling clothes and disguise that for this next child, which of course is baby Zeus. So as Zeus is born, she somehow quickly disguises him for this rock, this big rock in swaddling clothes. And so Cronus, without realizing it, has swallowed not Zeus, but a stone in swaddling clothes that then goes into his belly. And Zeus is whisked away at that point, and he goes into a completely different land, Mount Ida, and he's raised there. This is the mountain that we didn't explore in the 9th house, maybe because it was destined to be explored in the 10th. Mount Ida is the place where Zeus is raised by Amalthea, who's a nanny goat, sister of Pan. And Amalthea had just given birth to twins, and the twins sacrificed their milk to give it to Zeus. And so Zeus was fed off the milk of the nanny goat. So in a way, we can feel the seagoat here, can't we? We can feel how Zeus gets his nourishment. He gets the milk of the mother, but he gets the milk of the nanny goat because he doesn't actually have the milk of the mother. But then as he takes in that milk, it makes him particularly strong because Amalthea, as the nanny goat, as the great mother, is a very potent and powerful force. So the milk that he takes in is a very potent and powerful energy. And as he takes in this energy, which is very much the I establish of the IC down the bottom of the chart, as he takes in this milk, he grows stronger and stronger as the years pass by. He's becoming so strong that he's becoming a little hard to hide even over there on Mount Ida, because he's loud and thunderous, and the way he plays is quite thunderous. So they have the giants down there making all sorts of noises down in their workspaces to disguise all the thundering of Zeus as he's a little child. So this is where they're down there banging rocks together and doing their metallurgy and creating with the force of all of these stones and rocks down in this world, in order to disguise the thunderousness of Zeus as he's growing up with the strength of Amalthea's milk. So over time, he's becoming stronger and more powerful. And then it comes a time, and this is the thing about the MC. There comes a time when we need to recognize that we have to go and meet the challenge of the world. And for Zeus, that challenge is to confront the father. And if that sounds familiar, it's probably because you've watched Star Wars and many other versions of this that is really one of those essential mythic elements. You know, when Luke Skywalker is off with Yoda being trained by the Jedi Master, this is very similar to what's happening here for Zeus. But for Zeus, rather than being trained by the master Yoda or some other master over there, he's actually receiving an I can't see milk from the mother, from the nanny goat. He's receiving it and he's growing stronger and stronger until the time comes where he has to leave this place and go up and confront the father, which is very much like Luke when he eventually has to go and confront Darth Vader. So what he does, which is an interesting image for us to consider, is that he sacrifices Amalthea, the nanny goat. He sacrifices her. And in that sacrifice, Amalthea is willing to be sacrificed, to be given over to Zeus. And in fact, that is when the constellation of Capricorn is created, by this sacrifice. And sacrifice in this sense means to make sacred. So the mother is sacrificed here and put up into the sky as the constellation of the nanny goat, which becomes Capricorn, the seagoat, which is a remembrance of this time of Zeus's life. And then he puts on the pelt of the nanny goat right over his head. So he has these two horns and he has this absolutely terrifying, apparently it was very much a terrifying and terrible and intense pelt. And so when Zeus put this pelt on, he looked like truly a god. So in a sense, then he becomes this sort of hybrid creature, part goat, part human. And he, with this pelt on, he takes on all of the energy of the goat. And that's what makes him able to go up into the world and confront his father Cronus. And of course, as he goes to confront Cronus, it becomes part of a 10-year war, like the 10th house. And this 10-year war is how he essentially becomes the chief himself. He does the great achievement of coming up against that tyrannical force and wresting the power from the father and taking it upon himself. Of course, along the way, he has to confront a lot of monsters. In fact, he has to confront the greatest monster of all, the Typhon, who's an amalgamation of all these different figures like lions' heads and snakes' tails and wings and all these kinds of things. And it's an enormous being. And in fact, in order to defeat the Typhon, he has to put 10, again, the number 10 mountains stacked on top of each other, stacked on top of the Typhon. This is the sort of power he has to channel in order to overcome the forces that confront him there. So mythically, this is what the 10th house can look like for us. In a very exaggerated form, obviously, this is mythic stuff, but perhaps it's this that we have to come up against when we're coming into our MC and meeting the world and meeting our destiny, in a sense. So I wonder where that takes you if you reflect on your own journey between your IC, and if you remember what it was like when we were with Melanie in those discussions of the IC, that potent conversation that Melanie and I had, that was actually one of the most listened to and one of the most responded to conversations of this whole series, my conversation on the 4th house with Melanie, the IC. And if you haven't listened to that, I definitely recommend going back to that. This is a good time as we're in this Capricorn season. And as we're exploring the MC and the 10th house, this is a great time to go back to that conversation and see what else is down there for you. Because one of the things that can happen in the 10th house is that we can lose touch with that seagoat tail. We can lose touch with the soul. We can be so invested in the Capricorn head, the horns of the head, and being seen as powerful and being seen as successful, having all the money, having all the achievements and accomplishment, that we actually lose touch with the inner process, the inner world of the IC. And of course, this is the great challenge of the MC, is to move out into the world, into the success, but not losing touch with our deep interiority. It's something that Thomas More speaks a lot about, and it's something that he will really elaborate on for us in the podcast to come. And, making sure that the MC is a metaphor as well for the IC. It's a metaphor for our becoming and the work that we do on our soul. It's just a flowering of everything that we're investing in the root system there. A very valuable flowering, but that's why I think it's a really beautiful and important myth, this one, that Zeus takes upon himself the power of that nanny goat, which means that he's fully nourished and he's fully nurtured. And of course, as human beings, rather than as gods, we're not fully nourished, we're not fully nurtured, and we can find ourselves cut off from our tails and out there in the world, out there exposed, perhaps overexposed, especially in this world that really explicitly values the external much more than it does the internal. That's the message we're given in this modern world again and again. And it's an act of revolution in a way, just like it is for Zeus there, an act of revolution to invest in that deep interiority and let that grow its strength, like our journey through the spine. Let that grow its strength and then slowly go from that seagoat's tail up into the horns, up into the goat head, and up into the ability to really stand into our authority. Authority, of course, comes from a word that also has the author, so the one who writes our own story, and also authenticity. And how can we truly be authentic if we're not connected to the whole of ourselves, to our tail that goes down into that deep interiority, into that something that is really intrinsic in us that wants to grow up and out? Of course, another image that came to us there from the story, from the myth, was that Cronus swallows his children. And it's something that I've referred to in different podcasts in this series even. But this is the Saturnian process of gestation. Gestation first in the womb of the mother, but then also gestation in the womb of the father as well. And I think it's that gestation in both the masculine and the feminine, those two horns, that is trying to work itself out and through into the world, into the 10th house, that deep gestation process. And again, in a world that is obsessed with achievement and celebrates the external much more than it celebrates the internal, this can cause a lot of confusion, and we can find that when we're in that deep process of being gestated, that something is wrong. That something is wrong down here. I should be up in the world achieving and doing amazing things. But sometimes we need to trust that this gestation is just right. Like, we can't rush the growth of the oak tree. We can't just skip through these phases of development. And perhaps that's what these houses actually give us, that there's plenty of time to go through each house and to give each house its proper time and dedication, so that we are making sure we're invested in becoming a whole person. And this topic of the whole, so this is where I want to go now for our final chapter of this episode. I want to return to Dane Rudhyar, because his passage here is rich and complex, and I think it's going to help us with getting a deeper understanding of this house and what it's really about. I'm going to read for you some of Dane's words here, and we can pause and reflect along the way. And he starts with this idea of the greater whole, W-H-O-L-E, of course, not H-O-L-E, but it is interesting that the whole and the whole are the same word, so adjacent to each other. Dane says, this greater whole means, first of all, human society. It may be a very limited human society, a small racial group in a village, or it may be a vast nation, or the whole of mankind, visible and invisible as well. I just love this starting point here, because he's articulating something that I've really wrestled with, of like, how can I talk about this, MC? Because it's the world, it's our interaction with the world. And I'm like, well, what does that even mean, the world, these days, especially as we move into this enormous world that is presented to us on social media, that tells us about there's this world out there that we should be participating in. But it seems like the kind of world that can really disconnect us as we try to, get likes and followers and create some big thing out there in the world. It's like that process can be so sped up that we miss these moments of real deeper development. We're almost like cut off from this tail. So I love this idea that it can be very small. It's just like your little village, essentially, is the world. But it can also be the whole of mankind, all of us, essentially, visible and invisible as well. So let's keep going here with Dane. In any case, it is the whole composed of units more or less similar to the self, and to which he relates himself on the basis of a give and take operation. It is a whole which may not as yet be considered as a real organism, but one which eventually and ultimately should reach the state of organic wholeness. A tribe is an organic whole of a kind, so is a nation which is the possessor of a well-established culture and natural spirit. Humanity will become someday, in an even more definite manner, a planetary organism. Each human personality will be then a cell of this organism, which we have named elsewhere the synanthropy, which is quite the concept, the synanthropy, where there's an understanding of the synchronous nature of reality. Interesting. Okay, and then he gets really into the crux of it here. Ideally speaking, the message of the 10th house for any human personality is this: find your place and function in that greater human whole, which you are able realistically to envision, and which you are ready by birthright efficiently to participate. If you can actually see no farther than a small tribe or economic group, then that for you is the greater whole. If you can conceive clearly and act efficiently in terms of humanity in the whole, then that should be for you the greater whole. The important thing is not to confuse an intellectual dream with an actual reality, not to consume yourself yearning for an unattainable ideal, and thus fail to participate efficiently in the only greater whole in which you are able to function with competence. It's just really good 10th house wisdom here. It's really good 10th house wisdom. Like, what is the whole for you that you are participating in? What can you access realistically and allow that to be enough? And that's the thing about all of these earth houses. They inspire us not towards some lofty, otherworldly, next level climbing, but to something that feels like it is enough, and something of that enoughness then grows into next levels and next levels. And maybe that then does actually access the whole, as in the whole of humanity over time, and maybe not. The crux of this 10th house problem, he actually calls it the mansion, so I'll use mansion here. The crux of this 10th mansion problem is the matter of power. Actual, real, operative power. So you can definitely hear that in the story of Zeus as well. The scope of your participation in any human whole composed of units similar to you is determined always by the power which you can marshal and put to efficient use. It is wise not to yearn for attainment beyond your power to achieve. Yet it is most unwise to bind yourself to narrow ranges of power operation out of false modesty, psychological inhibitions, and fears. It's really hitting home now, isn't he? It is true that all nature's powers are there for you to use, take them. But it is also true that it is better to fulfill your dharma, or inherent capacities. The dharma of another is full of danger. Self-inflation, imperialism, auto-hallucinations, and ideas of grandeur do not pay, but to shrink from fulfilling the greater purpose of your life because of an inferiority complex and fears pays even less. What then shall guide our judgment and the scope of our attempts at establishing on true bases and in true proportions our participation in the work of the world? Obviously, the only guide is understanding. It is this understanding gained in the 9th mansion which will enable us to evaluate the nature and scope of the greater whole in which we are to function as an efficient part. As the gates of the 10th mansion open, the final revelation of the purpose of our destiny, in terms of whatever represents for us by birthright the greater whole, should come upon us. It may come to us by the force of circumstances, as a job, or as the nearly unavoidable choice of a profession, or it may reach us in the form of a vision of a work of destiny that will compel us to grow beyond our apparent limits. But whether with the sharp intensity of a release of power from on high, or with the matter-of-fact compulsion of social necessity, it will come at the threshold or at some critical moment of the phase of development which we now symbolize as the 10th mansion, the mansion of power, of achievement and mastery. He then says, what is achievement and what is mastery? To achieve is to become chief. The word chief comes from the Latin caput, which means head. Achievement signifies, therefore, coming to a head. But what is a head without a body? What are the best brains without the vital organs contained in the trunk of the human body, organs which feed and sustain the brain? In what, moreover, resides the power of the master, save in the unanimous allegiance of those over whom he rules as chief or head? In other words, what is the great individual without the collectivity of which it is the fruition and seed? There comes a time when the seed leaves the plant which it gave at birth, when the great individual leaves the collectivity which fulfilled itself unconsciously in and through him as chief and master. But as this occurs, the collectivity disintegrates and the great individual finds his place and function in a still greater collectivity or whole, to which he brings the fruition of that form which he arose. He goes as a plenipotentiary, that is, as one who's assumed the power of his collectivity. Some very potent images here from Dane Rudhyar. I'll leave a link in the show notes to this book and highly recommend this one and so many other of Dane Rogers' works that will help us get into that true, deep level of astrological wisdom and knowledge. So we can hear within Dane's words that this is what the 10th house is. I believe it's like what I talked about with Brian Clark on the podcast. This is the house that shapes us, and this is the house that we shape, because the world shapes us and we are shaped by the world. And in that sense, the field of experience in the 10th, as Liz Green said, is essentially around our experience of the mother, because the mother was our first experience of the world. We are born premature, all of us, by a long way. And so the second gestation is done in plain sight, in plain view. The first gestation in the world of the mother is the invisible one, and the second one is when we're born and helpless and surviving upon the second womb in a way, surviving off mother's milk. And maybe a lot of this image from the myth today gives us a way of being with that and of working within that, of that fact of the human condition, that we're born so much more premature than other mammals. And so this experience of the mother is our experience of the world. That's the first imprint of the experience of the world. And we have to move through that and with all of its beauty and all of its challenges as we come into this greater world, which is the Great Mother. And the Great Mother is bound to give us many challenges, just as in the story of Hercules, it was Hera, the Great Mother, that gave Hercules ultimately all of the labors and all of the challenges in which he could fulfill his destiny, even though she was his greatest antagonist and greatest hater ultimately. But still, without Hera, there's really no Hercules. And without the Great Mother, there's really no hero. And the big field of human experience that is the 10th is the big field of the Great Mother, where we're separated from, but then ultimately return to this big field of existence, this big field of becoming, and hopefully becoming who we are and who we are always meant to be, and giving that gift back to the realm of the earth, the earthly realm, the realm of existence itself, and even more literally giving back to this planet that needs the actualized humans to come back to her, to help her in her time of need. Wow, so that is our exploration of the 10th house. We'll be coming back with this conversation with Thomas More, which is just, I'm so looking forward to bringing that to you. It's a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure you'll enjoy that. And also a fairy tale. And I won't reveal which fairy tale it is just yet, but it is quite a famous one that you will all know, that will help us to get deeper into that movement between the MC and the IC, the 10th house and the 4th house, our root system of the 4th, and who we're meant to be, and our place in the world of the 10th. I look forward to seeing you there as we go even deeper into this house. And just to put a final signature on this episode, I want to bring back a quote from a TV show that I watched as a child that I've probably referenced many times because I love it so much. It was a Chinese story that was adopted by the Japanese and then dubbed at the BBC in London. And the show, of course, is Monkey, otherwise known as Monkey Magic. And there was a quote in that show that I often come back to, and that quote is this: "Your work is to find your work, and then, with all of your heart, give yourself to it. No one purifies another." Thank you for listening to On the Soul's Terms podcast. To support the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review, sharing with friends, or becoming a patron at patreon.com/onthesoulsterms. Until next time.